Today's section and what we're going over is called completing the square, but there's a couple of other methods that are listed here to solve quadratic equations. So, first we're going to look at solving by finding square roots. In this case, we're looking specifically when we don't have an x term, so b times x, our b is 0, which just cancels that out, and I have what's left over is ax squared plus c equals 0. These can be solved using square roots like we show here. So first I have 4x squared plus 10 equals 46. My main goal here is to get x squared by itself. So I subtract over the 10, which gives me 4x squared equals 36, and then I divide by 4, which just gives me x squared equals 9. Now, if we look up here, I then take the square root of x squared to get rid of my square, and that gives me x. Then I take the square root of 9, and anytime that I'm adding a square root to an equation, it's plus or minus the square root of whatever that is. So in this case, it's plus or minus the square root of 9, which just boils down to plus or minus 3. So the square root of 9 is 3, easy to see. So x is equal to plus or minus 3, and I break that down here by saying x equals negative 3 and x equals 3 are solutions to my equation. So that was our first board to look over. We have 3 more to go. So the second one is solving a perfect square trinomial. So we went over what a perfect square trinomial is in last class when we were just looking at factoring, but now we're actually using that to solve our equations. So in this case, I need to check and see if it is a perfect square trinomial. So in here, I can write this as x squared. So x is my first term. And I can rewrite my plus 4 as 2 squared. Now, I need to look at this and make sure that x times 2 again, so it's twice the product of x and 2, equals my center term. And in this case, 4x equals 4x, so that checks out. The last thing I need to take note of is the sign in the center, which in this case is a positive sign. So I translate all this over here. All of this part factors down to x plus 2 squared, and that's still equal to 25. I can then use square roots like I just did. So square root both sides. I added in a square root, so it's plus or minus where I added in. This just boils down to x plus 2 equals plus or minus 5. So I have that x equals negative 2 plus or minus 5. So x equals negative 2 plus 5, and x equals negative 2 minus 5. That boils down to x equals 3, and here we have x equals 7. And these are solutions of our equation there. So let's move on to the next one. This is by far the most important part of today's lesson. It's called completing the square, and that's what we're learning to do here. So specifically, our goal is to find the value of c such that ax squared plus bx plus c factors as a perfect square trinomial. So we just went over what a perfect square trinomial is, and we need to find c. So in this case, to find c, we're taking our b, dividing it by 2, and then squaring it. That's the method to find your c. Since this is an equation, what I add to one side, I must also add to the other. That's just something I need to keep in mind here. And we'll see that today when we're working with algebra tiles to complete the square. So let's give you an example just by equation, and tomorrow we'll do all algebra tiles. So my example is x squared plus 6x minus 7 equals 0. My first step is to find out what c would make a perfect square trinomial. So My c is equal to b over 2, and that's all squared. My b in this case is 6 over 2, which just gives me 3 squared, which is 9. So the c I'm looking for is 9, and I need to plug it in to this equation. So again, what I do to one side, I added 9 here. I must also do to the other side. I added 9 here. Now, this factors as a perfect square trinomial. My first step is to get it all by itself. So I added over 7. So 7 added to 9 is 16. And now I factor this as a perfect square trinomial, which gives me x plus 3 squared equals 16. Now I can fall back at the first chart, which was just taking the square root of both sides. Again, if I add a square root to the problem, it needs to be plus or minus the square root of 16. Now let's move up here. That leaves me with x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 16. Now, I break this down by just subtracting the 3 over. X is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is just 4, so in my next step, that was the only thing I did. And now, I've set up that x equals negative 3 plus or minus 4. So x is equal to negative 3 plus 4 and negative 3 minus 4. That's what this is stating. So my x is equal to 1, or my x is equal to negative 7. Both of those are solutions to this equation. So today, when we're completing the square with algebra tiles, what we're looking for is you're finding what c I have to add to both sides to make this work. So when I find the plus 9 on the other side of the equal sign, I'm adding my 9. And then I'm just moving everything over to be able to factor it. I'll see you guys in class tomorrow.